Okay, let me go ahead and share my screen so we can get into this. Okay, all right. So, right, this is where we were going to start today. So we were going to start with the Texas court system. All right. So what I want to first, of course, explain is that we've been talking for the last couple of weeks about the similarities and differences between the federal branches of government and how we compare them to their Texas counterparts. Now, in terms of the actual job itself, in terms of actually being a judge and presiding over cases, and actually, especially when it comes to like criminal cases, civil cases as well, that aspect is pretty much the same, right? A judge, whether it's the federal level or at the state level, their job itself is pretty much going to be the same, where they're going to be presiding over evidence that's been introduced, and you have the prosecuting attorneys, the district attorneys versus the defense attorneys trying to, convince the jury whether this defendant is guilty or not guilty. That is the same in terms of what we see like at the federal level, right? The only difference is that in the federal district court, they're dealing with federal crimes. However, the way these judges get to their positions and the way that the jurisdiction is set up, that is a major difference in Texas, because Texas has one of the most complex and fragmented judicial systems of all the states. The structure is the same as we saw back during the Republic of Texas days. So there are some very deep criticisms when it comes to the Texas court system. The idea is that it hasn't been modernized, that it still operates the same way as it did back in the 1840s here, or the 1830s here. So some of the criticisms, let's take a look at some of the criticisms here. So there's duplication of jurisdiction, or also called overlapping jurisdiction. What this means here is that unlike the federal level, where at the federal court system has three distinct levels. You have your district court, where this is your trial court. This is where, let's say, you get arrested for violation of immigration law or drug trafficking, all these federal crimes. You're going to go before a federal judge, and you're going to have a federal prosecutor that is going to be prosecuting that federal crime. And of course, you will have access to either your own personal defense attorney or a public defender that handles these federal crimes. So that's the same, right? That's the same in that so that's the same, like we talked about in terms of what the judges do. So for that level, that's very straightforward, right? That is the first level. The second level after that is the circuit court level. Now, this is for the federal system. Keep in mind, this is for the federal system. The second level is the circuit court. So at the circuit court, this is the first appellate court, right? This is where you appeal. Let's say you got convicted for these immigration crimes and you want to appeal your case. You can appeal it to the circuit court, right? Let's say the circuit, of course, we'll talk about what appeals court does here in a bit. But let's say the circuit court upholds your decision and you lose the appeal. Then you do have the right to appeal to the Supreme Court, which is the third and highest level. Now, also keep in mind, if you remember from American government, that the Supreme Court is very selective in terms of the number of cases they take. They usually take about, they usually take about 100 cases a year. They usually get about 10,000 every year, and they usually take about 100 cases. So they're very selective in terms of what they take, and they usually and the reason for the courts in terms of what they're looking for in these cases is they're looking for constitutional issues. So if you're appealing to the Supreme Court just because you don't want to be executed, that's not necessarily a good enough reason for the Supreme Court to take that case. There has to be some specific constitutional issue, and even if there is a constitutional issue, the Supreme Court is not mandated to take your case and things like that. So again, so that's pretty straightforward on the federal side. With Texas, there's a lot more of these levels. I want to show you, all right, like look at all the different number of levels. And when we talk about overlapping jurisdiction, this is what we're talking about here. We see this here mostly at the lower levels, right? What I mean by this is, like, let's say, let's say I'll give an example once we get to the justice and the municipal court. But what I wanted to mention here is that you've got a situation where your case could go to either one of these, and you're not sure, right? So that's what overlapping jurisdiction means here, right? I'll explain a little bit more here when we get to these courts as well as the county courts here. The lowest level of courts not keeping records of their proceedings. This also happens where, I think some of us have all gone through this at some point, where I think some of y'all have probably gotten traffic citations, whether it's for speeding or like maybe running a red light. I think it's all happened to us at some point, right? if you all have had one of those traffic citations, have you all noticed that when you go like to the city, or let's say if DPS pulls you over, then they assign you to the justice of the peace? Have you noticed that it's very informal, right? It's not like you actually go and like have an actual court proceeding. It's done very informally, where in a lot of cases you don't even actually get to talk to the judge. They kind of just look up your record, and then, oh, okay, you haven't gotten anything in the last couple of years, so you're eligible to do the defensive driving course, and then you do that course and you submit the documentation, and then they take it off your, they waive the fine or something like that. So it's done very informally, right? So there's not really going to be a need to keep records of those proceedings if they even have them, because they handle very routine circumstances, right? Obviously, of course, this would not happen in a higher level court. The court would not. The court would definitely keep records of, let's say, it's a murder trial, right? But again, because this is a very routine, just a very ordinary type of, like I said, routine type of circumstance, you're not necessarily going to have the courts really put too much focus on it, right? Now, of course, if someone doesn't have the money to pay the fine, that's going to be important to them, but it's more so in terms of the grand scheme of things. Some courts serving to both try cases and hear appeals, right? Some of these levels here, like for the county levels, right? You see here that the county can hear cases outright, but they can also get appeals from the justice courts, right? So these county level courts also have the ability to both be appellate courts and try cases. So a lot of these issues normally happen at the lower levels of the court. As you move up higher, the issues aren't quite as evident, but the lower courts definitely have a lot of this confusion here. Lack of standardization within the system. This is talking about like how some judges, again, at the lower levels, you're probably starting to see a pattern here that the lower levels is where a lot of these issues are happening. Where the example I want to give is that some of these judges at the lower level, they don't even need to be actual attorneys. They don't actually have had to go to law school, pass the bar exam, and actually be practicing attorneys to be judges. It's not until you get to the district courts and above where you are going to need to be a practicing attorney, because again, those cases are going to be more consequential as opposed to like maybe defaulting on your credit card, right? That's not to say that that's not important, especially for the person who defaulted and doesn't have the money to pay in the first place. But in terms of the way society sees it, it's not going to be as consequential as like a murder or a rape case, things like that. You definitely would want to have a judge that has that type of strong legal background that's backed up by their law degree and also through their years of experience as a practicing attorney. And the jurisdiction, of course, varies from county to county. We'll talk about how that, the larger populated counties are going to have more courts. They also have more specialty courts, but then the smaller populated counties, they might have just maybe one court, or maybe, just a, in terms of one district court, right? And things like that. They might not have too many of these really smaller courts because there's just not, too many people that live out in that area. So there's not really that need for that type of jurisdiction here. But again, we'll talk more about this here as we go through. Okay, so again, so this is the listing. We're going to look at the municipal courts, the justice courts first, then we're going to move up to the county level courts, district courts, court of appeals, and then the two highest courts, right? Remember we talked before about how Texas is one of two states, Oklahoma is the other one, where you actually have two highest level courts. You've got the Supreme Court and the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. So we will talk about that here. Let's talk about municipal courts here. Now, let's talk about what they do. So municipal courts are basically responsible for municipal matters, and municipal is a fancy term for city, right? So these are like your city judges. So they are authorized by the state constitution. They handle minor criminal matters, fines of 500 or less, no possibility of prison. Again, like I mentioned, these usually are the traffic violations, or if it's some sort of petty crime, right? Like let's say you steal beer from HEB, right? It's not going to be something that's going to be handled by a district judge because it's just a very minor offense, right? So they handle those, right? They do have, like I said, concurrent jurisdiction with justice courts. The way it usually works here is the justice courts will usually try to take the higher fines, or and we're going to see right now when we go over the justice courts. And the justice courts are what we used to call justice of the peace. That's what we used to call them. I still call them that because that's kind of the that's the term that they've had for so many years, and so it's kind of difficult to change, when it comes to, especially for people, right? People might not necessarily, like, if you tell them justice courts, they might be, oh, you mean justice of the peace? Well, that's what they used to be called. So I just call them justice of the peace just because that's what we tend to know them as. But yeah, so they do have that concurrent jurisdiction when it comes to handling of minor criminal offenses and minor fines, right? They do have exclusive jurisdiction over municipal ordinances, right? So this is where, if let's say you are a business and you're making all this noise, like you're running this air compressor, and one of your neighbors in the back, that one of your neighbors is complaining because it's too loud. And again, personal story here. You're going to get fined by the city, right? The city's going to issue a citation, and you're going to have to answer to that citation through municipal court. So they handle that jurisdiction over municipal ordinances, like I said, like noise ordinance, as well, again, as traffic violations occurring within the city. That's going to be handled by the municipal courts. Can impose fines up to $2,500. So again, if you violate the city ordinances, which a city ordinance is basically the laws of the city, it's just a fancy name for saying that. They can impose these fines, not to exceed 2,500, but that's still, let's see. So it's saying that there's an issue with my microphone. Can you all hear me or no? I just want to make sure that y'all can hear me. Let me see. Let me check the chat really quickly. Okay, so Ashley says it. Okay, sounds good. Okay, just want to make sure that y'all can hear me. Okay, because I was getting that notification. Okay, so municipal courts do not have civil jurisdiction here. Again, that is more so, the civil jurisdiction is going to happen at the justice of the peace. So that's why, if let's say you default on a credit card, right? That's going to go to the justice of the peace. Now, technically, traffic violations are considered criminal offenses. A lot of people don't know that you actually could be arrested for these traffic violations. It doesn't happen very often. It's normally a routine thing, but a traffic violation is considered a criminal offense. So that's why the municipal courts handle the traffic violations. But yeah, when it comes to civil jurisdictions, such as like I said, like defaulting on a credit card, that's going to go to the justice of the peace here, right? And they do not keep records of trials if they even have them, because again, like we said, it's all done very routinely. Qualifications determined by the city council. Most of them are appointed by the city. Some of them do have nonpartisan elections. I know the city of Edinburgh does have nonpartisan elections for their municipal judges because I've seen their signs. So that, some of the cities do have that, but most of them, they just appoint them. Basically a fancy term for hiring them. Usually 2-year terms, paid by the city, and there are highly variable salaries, right? Because some of the larger cities, like Houston, can afford to be able to pay their municipal judges more than maybe like some rural city, that doesn't have too much tax revenue coming in. A smaller city is not going to be able to pay their municipal judges at as much as a larger city would here, right? So again, so this is at the lowest level. They deal with city violations, city ordinance violations, as well as the minor traffic violations. So if a municipal police officer pulls you over, it'll go, and they issue a traffic citation, it'll go to the municipal court here. Now, I also do know that for the let's see, for the next one, for the justice courts, if DPS pulls you over, because it has happened to me before, not in a while, but when DPS pulls you over and writes you a citation, then that's going to go to a justice court. At least that's been in my experience. So the original trial courts with both civil and criminal jurisdiction, right? So again, so for the justice courts, they do have what's called original trial. This is where original jurisdiction means that they hear the case for the first time, or they get they hear the case, they hear the circumstances. The legal system, once you get fined, the judge that's going to respond to that fine is going to be the justice court, at least initially, right? As long as it's not like a major offense. So they deal with misdemeanor criminal cases, no possibility of jail time, minor civil cases, right? So again, they deal, so just like what we saw, like with the municipal courts, they also deal with misdemeanor criminal cases, right? These very minor cases. They have exclusive jurisdiction over civil cases where the amount of controversy is 200 or less, and concurrent jurisdiction with both county and district courts when the amount in controversy is between $200 and $5,000. I'm sorry, I'm getting that notification again here on my computer. I told you I was having computer problems today, so I'm sorry about that. Okay, so let's kind of break this down here a bit. So here's that issue of overlapping jurisdiction or concurrent jurisdiction again. So let me give you a scenario that actually did happen to me. So many years ago, probably about 10 years ago, when I was first trying to get into as a teacher, right? I became a high school teacher about 10 years ago. Then 3 years after that, I became a college professor, and I've been a college professor since then for the last starting my sixth, I think, or is it starting my 7th year, 6th or 7th year, something like that. I've been doing this for, for a while. So there was a situation where I didn't have much money. I was a substitute teacher. I didn't have much money of anything. That's not a full-time. I mean, it is sort of a full-time job, but it's like a full-time temporary job where it depends on like if teachers are going to be out or things like that. So I wasn't able to make that much money. Also, that was the semester that I was finishing up my first master, so I wanted to focus on making sure that I graduated. So I did not have too much money. And so I had a situation where I defaulted on a credit card because I just didn't have the money, right? Am I either going to pay my credit card or am I going to pay for my groceries? I think we know where that's, what choice, anybody would make. So then the company that issued me the credit card, they sued me, and they had every right to sue me because I violated the terms and conditions of their contract. So they wanted their money, nothing wrong with that. And so my case went to one of the justices of the peace judges over in Edinburgh, right? So the reason why I bring this up is because the amount in question was 1,500. That's how much I owed on the credit card. So I could have gone to any of these 3 courts, either the justice of the peace or the county or the district courts, right? So that's confusing for me because I don't know which court I'm going to go to, right? So because of that, it does leave, the defendant kind of like in an interesting quandary here because they're not sure which of the courts are going to pick up their case. Now, what they do try to do, and again, they try to do this. This isn't always 100% possible. Is they do try to put the smaller amounts with the lower courts. Like they wouldn't necessarily, like if let's say it was 500, it wouldn't make logical sense to send that to a district court, right? The district court is going to handle the really big money, like the really big amounts. So they can handle more than 5,000. This is just the 5,000 has nothing to do with the county or the district. They can get in on this, but the justice courts can't get in on anything larger than 5,000. I don't know if that makes sense. So the justice court is limited to 5,000, but the county and the district courts are not limited to 5,000, but they can even go even less than that. But again, the idea is that you want to try to assign your bigger lawsuit cases with like the millions of dollars. You want to assign them to the district courts, and then the county courts, and then they go in order, right? The county courts have the smaller amounts, maybe the over 5,000, and then the justice courts have the things 5,000 and below, right? Because that just makes logical sense. But it doesn't always happen that way because you also have to look at the docket in terms of, let's say you're looking at all the different, all the different courts, and you're saying, hey, the justice courts have way more than the county, and the district courts also have a lot. So let's kind of put a few more here in the county courts. They want to try to make it as even as possible. But again, that's not always possible. The justice courts may also act as a notary or a coroner and can perform marriages, right? So I think some of y'all probably heard of like people going and getting married at the justice of the peace. So that's one of those interesting ways that people can get married. And of course, they also act as the coroner, especially like in your rural counties where, if let's say they go like, let's say you've got someone alerts law enforcement that there's a dead body somewhere there, like out in the countryside, then they of course will alert the justice of the peace to go and be the official coroner, right? To officially determine the time that they died, and be in charge of setting up the autopsy and all that stuff. So right, so they can be the coroner as well as a notary, to notarize documents. But like I said, especially the justice courts are going to have more. They're going to have more responsibility in your more rural counties because there's not as many judges out there. So they do wear a lot more hats in your more rural areas. Qualifications though. Now, like I said, these judges do not need to be an attorney, right? So there's no constitutional or statutory qualifications. Only about 6% of Texas Justice Court judges are lawyers. So again, very few of them actually are. Because if they're lawyers, they probably would prefer to go be district judges, right? So it's almost like how, I don't know if you're aware of this, but a lot of like professors, instructors at the community college level, a lot of them don't have doctorates. Like I don't have my doctorate. I just got admitted to a doctoral program and I'm going to be working on it, but it's not required for me to be an instructor, right? So So, but again, that also makes sense because as a community college instructor, I don't have some of the benefits as, let's say, like a full professor like at a university, right? But then again, they also have a lot more responsibility than I do. They have to do research, whereas I'm the type where I would probably just want to just teach more classes, things like that. But anyway, so again, so just keep in mind that for the justice of the peace courts, that they almost all of them are not attorneys. The judges are elected to 4-year terms, and the salary is set by the county commissioner, right? So they are paid by the county, right? So I guess you could say technically they are county employees here, and they do get that money from the county. Same thing with the county courts; they're also appointed by the county, by the county commissioners court here, right? So these, of course, are courts of record. The county courts, the book talks about how that the reason why they're considered courts of record is because, and we'll talk more about this when we get to counties in the next chapter, when we get to local government, that the whole idea of having counties was so that people would not have to go to Austin for everything. If you needed to get copies of like birth certificates, death certificates, not of course obviously not yourself, but if your family members, like if let's say your parents have passed away, you can get copies of those. Or let's say like records of deeds, sales of houses, things like that. You don't have to go to Austin for all that. You can just go to the county seat. So for us, in Hidalgo County, that's Edinburgh. So you can go to the county seat and you can request those documents. So that's why there are courts of record to officially keep records of the county and all that record keeping that's important. In large counties, they may devote full time to administration of county government, right? So again, not necessarily getting involved in trials and cases and things like that. The county judge is a great example of that, because even though he's considered a judge, but he doesn't actually proceed. I'm sorry, he doesn't actually preside. I'm sorry, not proceed. Preside over court cases and things like that. Now we will talk about the county judge in the next chapter. How the county judge does have, some administrative and emergency powers, like we kind of saw a couple of years ago with the COVID pandemic when it first started. But for the most part, these county courts, like the county commissioners, that is considered a court, even though technically it's more like a commission rather than a court, but they still call it that. So there is a lot of that terminology. But again, so that's for them. But there's also other county courts that are devoted to, so there's some county courts that are devoted to the administration of county government, like I mentioned, like the county judge, the commissioner's court. But then there's also like your county court at law, which actually is involved in criminal and civil cases. So they do have original and appellate jurisdiction in criminal cases. So again, notice how the money goes up, right? Misdemeanors with fines over 500, possibility of jail time, and the civil matters are between 200 and 5,000. So see how they have that same overlapping jurisdiction here with the justice courts, right? So notice how the big money is going to be reserved for the district courts, right? So again, like I said, with my credit card situation, my credit card situation could have gone to either the justice court or the county court. So it went to the justice court, but it could have very well gone to the county court as well. I'm actually glad that it went to the justice court, because you could tell that they do things a little bit more relaxed there, as maybe like, as opposed to maybe going up to the next level here. Qualifications: judges are elected to 4-year terms, not required to be lawyers, but well informed in the law of the state. So, what is that defined as? There's not really any standards for that, because again, a law degree and being a licensed attorney would certainly satisfy that, but there isn't any specific statute that says that they have to have that requirement, right? So training may be as little as 30 hours, and pay is highly variable across the counties, right? Like I said, the counties that have more money coming in are going to be able to pay their judges more so than your more rural counties. So right, Hidalgo County is definitely going to have a lot more money to pay their judges, as opposed to maybe like Starr County or even Brooks County, which probably has even less people than Starr County, and less money coming in. And again, these judges are appointed by the county commissioners court. Now let's get to the district courts. Now these are elected here, right? So in terms of the okay, so hold on. So do keep in mind that these judges are elected in terms of the commissioners and all that, as well as the county judge. But like I said, we'll get more into that here, because the pay is set by the commissioner's court here. Okay, so let's go ahead and continue here. Okay, the court system. So the state trial courts. Now we're going to get to the actual criminal courts, right? So if you've ever seen like Law and Order, you've ever seen some of, SVU and all these other, crime drama shows, if you've seen like, or maybe like on TV, right? Like the O.J. Simpson case and things like that. This is your stereotypical court where you have the judge proceeding over the testimony being introduced by the prosecution, trying to go after the defendant, and the defense attorney trying to defend their client, and having the jury listen in and reach their verdict. This is the court where you have, because criminal cases are handled by the states, right? Remember, I talked about this I've talked about this in American government, right? That criminal issues, criminal complaints, if you get arrested for an offense, it's usually going to be a state offense, and so you're going to go before a state trial court, so which is the district court, right? And I've said that before that one of my uncles is a district judge here locally. So principal trial courts for the state, again, they handle your major crimes here as well as your major civil cases. So jurisdiction is both criminal and civil, and maybe specialized in large cities, right? So your larger cities may have judges that specialize with like alimony payments, or let's say child support, something like that. These really big amounts, especially if it's involving people with lots of money type of thing, right? So, or the suing of companies, right? And obviously, of course, major criminal offenses like murder and rape and those types of major index crimes. Those are going to be overseen by district courts. So it makes sense that they would definitely need more of that, more of those qualifications we're talking about here right now. That is a very caseload, like we mentioned, felony criminal trials, divorces, civil suits. So yeah, your district judges are definitely going to have to be well versed in both civil and criminal law. So of course it's going to make sense that they're going to go to law school, because in law school you do go over both criminal and civil law here. Some concurrent jurisdiction with county courts on civil issues. Again, this is usually dependent on the dollar amount. That the lower dollar amounts are going to be handled by the county courts, and then your higher dollar amounts are going to be handled by the district courts, because again, the county courts, they don't need to have that legal background, at least the credentials, whereas the district courts do. And each county must have at least one juvenile court, right? So yeah, so here in Delaware County, we do have one of the judges. They actually named the juvenile center after him. I believe his name is I believe it's Judge Homer Salinas. I think that's his name. I could be wrong, but I've actually met him. I actually met him before one time. Very, very nice man. I don't know if he's still around, but yeah, the juvenile center is named after him because his court was responsible for overseeing the juvenile cases, right? And of course, juvenile cases are where you've got these these underage kids, but they're engaging in very, very severe crimes. And like I said, I used to be a correctional officer out at one of these juvenile correctional facilities, and yeah, some of these kids are they've done some stuff. I was supervising some kids that had been in there for murder. They had killed people. So some very, very heavy stuff in terms of the things that they've done, right? So with that being said, let's talk about the qualification. So judges elected to 4-year terms. And they do run on these partisan elections. They must be attorneys with at least 4 years experience. This actually has changed more recently with the last constitutional amendment, not this past one, but the one before. They did add a constitutional amendment to where now district courts, now you're going to need at least 8 years experience in order to be elected. So of course, if you had the 4 years, then you're already grandfathered in. But from here on out, you would definitely need those. You're going to need more experience. So they doubled the number of years of experience. Basic salary is $140,000 paid by state and supplemented by county. So again, the state is the one who foots the most of the bill for the state for the district courts, but the county also. What I want to find out is, so as a judge, if you retire, do you retire as a state employee, or do you also get some county benefits? Because that would be really cool if, let's say, you got both. Like, let's say you were getting 2 retirement checks, one from the state and one from the county. That definitely would be really cool to get if you could. Midterm vacancies filled by gubernatorial appointment. So again, this does happen. I know this happened a couple years ago, where there was one of these district court judges down here who resigned because he got in, he was in some legal trouble, and so Governor Abbott appointed his replacement, and his replacement was a Republican. No surprise there. And the Republican judge wanted to, he wanted to try to retain his seat, but he would have to run for, to try to get reelected, because the governor can make that midterm appointment or that temporary appointment but then in order to keep that seat, they have to run for it in the next election. So the Republican judge was not able to win because obviously, of course, he was a Republican. But that is something that that is the way it works here, right? So keep in mind that the district courts, they handle these major criminal and major civil issues. Now let's get to the appellate courts. Now, again, an appeal, of course, is where let's say you have this trial at the district court level. The jury rules against you. The jury, let's say they find you guilty, but let's say you want to file an appeal where you want to take it up. You want to take it up to the next level, right? That's basically what an appeal is, right? You appeal to the next level because you want for the next level court to look at your circumstance, right? This usually happens. I mean, usually the death penalty cases always get appealed automatically because of the fact that if you're sentencing someone to death, then we want to make sure that all the I's are dotted, the T's are crossed, that we have done our due diligence in terms of ensuring that this person is guilty. But you can appeal for a lot of different things. Certainly, your appeal would definitely be more would carry a lot more weight if, like, let's say the police engaged in, like, let's say a Fourth Amendment violation. Like, let's say they had a search warrant, but the search went beyond the search warrant, and you can make that argument. So that would certainly be something that you would definitely want to appeal on, right? Now, for the Court of Appeals, there are 14 courts across Texas because since Texas is so massive, there's 14 of these courts, and they have different geographical districts, right? So the state is divided up into these 14 courts across the entire state, and there's 3 to 13 justices per the court, right? Now, again, these justices also run on in partisan elections, right? So there's intermediate appellate jurisdiction, civil and criminal cases. What this is talking about is that this is the middle level of appeals, right? So they consider only written records from trial and oral arguments of counsel. So this is also another important aspect of appellate court. So when, let's say, a case gets to the Supreme Court is not going to be calling witnesses. They're not going to be calling for evidence to be introduced. They're basically just going to be listening to arguments being made. So it's not even, yes, it's a court, but it's not. It's a different type of setting where it's not so procedural. It's almost like having a meeting, so to speak, right? It's almost like listening to people, give their thoughts on something, and then you make a decision, right? So it's almost like a meeting more so than an actual trial. So what happens here is that the written records from the trial get sent over, not necessarily evidence, but the docket, like they get the docket, they get the actual verdict, they get the actual record of the court, right? And they also get for the defense attorney, like for the defendant, as well as the prosecutor, to show up and to basically not just make their oral arguments in terms of why they believe their side is correct, but also to provide context, right? To ask questions. So the judges will ask, them, the legal counsel, they will ask them questions. Again, it's kind of like a meeting. It's almost like a presentation, I guess you could say, right? As opposed to like an actual case. And then after all of that evidence, after all of the records have been submitted and the oral arguments have been made, then the judges will ultimately make a decision whether the previous decision should be upheld. That means whether it stays the same, or does it get overturned. Multi-judge panel, again, no juries. The judges are the ones who make these decisions. Cases are usually considered by a panel of 3 judges. What I mean by considered is that not all the judges have to agree to take a case. The Supreme Court also is the same way, where you don't need all 9 justices to agree to take a case. But once some of the judges agree, then all the judges have to hear the case, right? So again, there's a difference between considering. That's going to be whether the court approves to hear the case. And then if they approve to hear it, then it's heard by all the judges, right? So that all the cases heard en banc, which is together. Now, the qualification, justices must be at least 35 years old, at least 10 years of legal experience. So you see how the age number is going up as well as the years of experience is going up. And then justices are elected to staggered 6-year terms. So what that means is that every 2 years you have 1/3 of the justices on the court that are up for re-election, just like in the Senate, right? Where you can't elect all the judges at the same time, right? They are staggered. Base salary of 154,000, and higher with more experience. Okay, so that's the intermediate state appellate court. Now let's get to the highest state appellate court. So again, there's 2 of them, right? There's the Court of Criminal Appeals, and there's also the Texas Supreme Court. So remember that the Court of Criminal Appeals they handle criminal cases. So this is the highest state appeals court with criminal jurisdiction. So let's say you get to that, let's say you get to the Court of Appeals here, they uphold your case, you don't agree with that decision, you still feel that the court got it wrong. So you can also then, if it's a criminal case, you can appeal to the Court of Criminal Appeals. There's also writs of error, writs of habeas corpus here. So also keep that in mind, that, you know, this whole notion of these writs is that, you know, that if you are being accused of something, you do have that right to be able to, you know, have your day in court, to be able to defend yourself against these charges. And so this is all part of the legal process, right? That within the legal process, you do have the right to still, you know, ask for these appeals, right? That doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to get overturned, but you do have that right, you know, to request that process, right? I know when I was when I had my because they ruled against me on the credit card issue, and I did ask if I could appeal that. I didn't follow up with that because I just didn't have the ability to do so. But yeah, even at like those lower courts, you do have the right to appeal here. So okay, so then there's 9 elected judges, 3 judge panels, 6-year terms, like we were talking about here earlier with the appeals courts. The decisions can be appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, but remember, keep in mind, for what I talked about a little while ago, the Supreme Court is very specific in terms of, or they're very selective in terms of the types of cases that they get. If you're just appealing just because you don't want to die, unfortunately, that's not going to be a good enough reason for the Supreme Court to take your decision, even though that is unfortunate. But and then, of course, the qualifications, of course, same as the Court of Appeals. Salary is a little bit higher, though, 168 to 200,000 as you go up with more of these years of experience, right? So these judges can make actually pretty decent money. Now, of course, they've got a lot of responsibility, but they can make, you know, some pretty decent money here. The highest state appellate court, so that was on the criminal case. Let's go to the Texas Supreme Court, which handles civil jurisdiction. And we're also going to talk about how they're also an administrative body here. We kind of talked about that here a little bit. So, okay, let me just take a quick drink of water, and then we'll continue. So, the highest state appellate court with civil jurisdiction is the Texas Supreme Court. They hear civil as well as juvenile cases. So let's also reiterate this a bit, because I don't know if I made this clear, that criminal cases, of course, obviously are your actual like offenses that you commit that violate the criminal code, right? Like I said, your index crimes. Civil cases is not necessarily, it's not a crime, it's just a violation of a contract, right? It's a violation of something that you're supposed to do, right? So it's not an actual crime, it's just, you know, a violation of a contract, right? So that's what a civil case is. It's a disagreement. So the original jurisdiction is limited. So again, just, you know, so we do have the writs of error, as well as the writs of mandamus, which is the writ of mandamus, of course, is the way that which the appellate courts can mandate for the previous courts to send that documentation over to the court, so that they can you know the logistics of the case, so that they can actually make a ruling, because they're not going to be able to do anything if they don't have the information from the lower courts in terms of what happened with this case and why is this defendant appealing this. So there's 9 elected justices. So I'm going to try to go a little bit faster. 9 elected justices, 3 justices elected every 2 years. So again, these are also staggered as well. The qualification and salary same as the Court of Criminal Appeals, but they do have some extra duties here, right? So the Texas Supreme Court is probably regarded as a little bit more prestigious than the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, because they are responsible for the removal of judges here at the lower level. We'll talk about the Commission on Judicial Conduct here in a bit. And they're also responsible for overseeing the law schools. I remember we talked about how the Texas Supreme Court, they're responsible for certifying the law schools, accrediting them to ensure that, you know, the classes that are being taught meet those standards, for lawyers to be successful, you know, and things like that. So all the degree plans and the programs, they have to be approved by the Texas Supreme Court in order to have a fully functioning law school. And those certifications have to be maintained, constantly, right? You know, they constantly have to go to for accreditation, and also to oversee the bar exams, the creation of the bar exams, and to write the tests, basically, as well as also to write the study material, right? Remember, and also keep in mind that once you pass the bar exam, the Texas Supreme Court is the governing body that certifies you as an attorney. After you turn in your documentation and like you pay your application fee and all that stuff, then the Texas Supreme Court will actually award you your license, right, to actually, you know, practice law in Texas. So they definitely have a lot of administrative roles here. So okay, so let's go ahead and move on here. So we did talk about the juries before. Let's also mention the police here really quickly. So keep in mind that police is also a fragmented setup in Texas where you have multiple levels of police, right? So you've got DPS, right? The Texas Department of Public Safety. I've got a couple of friends who are DPS troopers. They have, at the time of this PowerPoint, they have 4,164. I'm sure it's gone up a little bit more because of Operation Lone Star and the money that's been devoted to you know, the DPS trooper force here. We've also got, so these are the state police, right? And you all know the state troopers, right? You've seen them. They drive around in the black car with the white hood and the gold state emblem, right? I'm sure you all have seen them, and they're the ones who wear, you know, the tan brown uniforms, right? And they've also got those hats, right? I've wanted to ask my my DPS friends if the hat is mandatory. Like, do you always have to wear it? Because I've seen troopers sometimes wear it, but sometimes they're not wearing it when they pull people over. So I don't think it's mandatory, but I'm sure they like to wear it because it's definitely cool. It's a cool looking hat, definitely very unique, you know, to Texas. So again, so these are the state police. So they have jurisdiction across the entire state. You also have 254 county sheriff's departments. So this is where you have your actual sheriff who's elected. We'll talk about him in local government. And then you have your sheriff, you know, your constables are also elected, and then you have your deputies, right? So the deputies, of course, are your actual, you know, your peace officers, right? So these are the county police officers. Their jurisdiction tends to be outside the city limits, and we've also got, not all the time though, so do keep in mind. So don't speed past a county constable or a county deputy if you're in the city, right? Because that they just don't do it. Okay, so that would definitely be my advice. You know, definitely don't do that because they are law enforcement and they can respond if they need to. And then of course we also have the 1,000 local police departments, right? So again, this is your city police departments, right? And we even have even more police departments than that. Right? Like SEC has a police department, so do some school districts, right? We also have the game wardens there that are peace officers there for the state parks, right? We even have some other police officers like DART over in Dallas. They're police officers for the downtown area. I think San Antonio also has those as well. They also have like downtown police officers as well. So even within some of these more specialized jurisdictions and things like that. So there are challenges, of course, like we said, overlapping jurisdiction. Like we said, you know, what happens if, like, let's say a county, you know, deputy sees something, but they're within the city, you know. So they try to have those agreements where they try to not step on not step on the jurisdictions, but sometimes it doesn't always happen that way. Sometimes there's tension between DPS and the local police departments and things like that. I've seen some of these videos like on YouTube, not of them, but there was this one video I saw the other day where you had like the county deputies and the city police were kind of like, you know, there was a lot of tension there, you know. So I've seen some of that stuff. It is interesting. And then of course, complex organizational responsibilities, because the police are responsible for so many things. We don't call the police if everything's fine, right? We call them whenever something bad's happening, right? So you also have to keep in mind that they've got a lot that they have to be responsible for, more so than even in years before. So, you know, there's, you know, you can see why there is problems, there are tensions. You know, again, I've studied American policing in grad school. I've been thinking about doing a doctorate in criminal justice. I'm doing my government one, but maybe I'll do a criminal justice one. I mean, just go figure, right? One dissertation is not enough for me, right? I want to do other ones, so we'll see if it actually happens. Okay, so also the removal and reprimand of lawyers and judges. So keep in mind that, again, lawyers are certified through the Texas Supreme Court, and then also, you know, through the Texas State Bar, which is overseen by the Texas Supreme Court. Fraudulent, dishonest, or unethical conduct. You know, so again, so lawyers also have their own code of ethics and the grievance committees in each congressional district. So this is where you can submit complaints, right? So you can submit complaints to the Texas State Bar if attorneys are violating their code of ethics, engaging in this type of inappropriate behavior. Judges also are subjected to complaints as well, right? So the Texas Commission on Judicial Conduct hears complaints about any judge. The district and appellate court, again, so they are also subjected to the impeachment power by the legislature, as well as, like I said, the Texas Supreme Court. They can also call for the removal of judges, and then lower court judges can also be removed by the district courts here. And then, like I said, the Texas State Commission on Judicial Conduct, they can remove any judge at any level. They can hear those complaints and they can call for a judge to be removed here. And again, depending on which level it is, right? So if it's at the district and the appellate court level, they'll usually call for their, to try to get for an impeachment and things like that. But it is complicated in terms of the types of hoops and hurdles that you have to go through. That's why judges don't hardly ever get removed, because there's just so much red tape and there's so much process that that you have to go through in terms of trying to even get that process going. So again, issues facing the Texas judiciary. Let's cover this really quickly. Too much crime, too many criminals. So fiscal versus social conservatives, right? The idea here is that it costs a lot of money to keep people incarcerated, right? So conservatives in more recent years have tried to cut the state budget, especially to try to cut prison budgets, because do we really need to be funding these people to kind of stay like at a country club / hotel type of things? I'm not saying that that's how it is. I've worked in a prison and know it's not like a hotel, but sometimes people who they'll say like, well, these prisoners, they get 3 meals a day, they get to work out all the time, they get their meds paid for. How bad could it really be? Well, it is dangerous. I've been assaulted in prison before, so it is dangerous. So anyone who says that, I challenge them to go and work a day as a correctional officer and see if they still have that same attitude. But it is what it is, right? People still have these, people have opinions, even if they might not necessarily be all that informed, right? I think we see that all the time, right? But the idea is that because people have this misnomer that the prison can't be all that bad, that they think that, okay, you know what, we need to cut some of that funding because it's not supposed to be like a vacation, right? There has been a decline in numbers of prisoners, but unfortunately what this has done is it's created a situation where you might have more of these criminals out on the street type of thing, right? This has also been an argument, right, that has been made by the social conservatives, right? The social conservatives will say, hey, we got all these criminals out on the street, but then the fiscal conservatives will come back and say, well, yeah, but we can't afford to keep them in prison, right? So with that combination, we've seen the decline in numbers of prisoners trend away from incarcerating non-violent offenders. So this would be like for your drug offenses, like let's say you get arrested for smoking marijuana, they're going to move more towards like just maybe paying a fine instead of being sent over to prison. And then plea bargains account for more than 9 out of 10 criminal convictions in Texas. So this is another thing that I'm not sure if y'all are aware of, that trials actually aren't that common. Most of the time, in fact, almost all the time, when you get arrested, you're probably going to enter into a plea agreement because the system is so overwhelmed. So some of y'all might ask, well, why would the prosecution want to go and get into and ask for the for this defendant to enter into a plea agreement when they have this evidence? Well, first of all, if you don't want to try to leave it up to the jury, you want to try to get the jury involved as little as possible, because the jury could decide that someone is not guilty and there's nothing you can do about it, right? Because the prosecution can't disagree with the jury's decision. So you want to try to avoid a case getting to trial as much as possible. So what you'll do is you'll try to bargain with these you'll try to bargain with these defendants and be like, hey, like, we've got this evidence, we're willing to, if let's say if you enter a plea of guilty, we will trim your sentence in half. So let's say you were going to go away for 5 years, we'll cut it down to 2.5. You get on good behavior, you might be out in, let's say, a year. For people who, for people, especially if they know that they're guilty, they might take that deal. They might be like, you know what, yeah, I'll take that deal. So as opposed to going to trial and basically, being sentenced for more years, right? But again, you might say, well, if they know that if the prosecution has if they know that they're guilty, or at least they have a good inkling of it, why wouldn't they still want to try to take them to trial? Well, another thing also is because of time. The docket is overwhelmed, right? They've got a bunch of people they have to get to, right? So they got to try to clear it out as quickly as possible, right? So they've got to try to get to the next person. So also to create efficiency, this is another reason why we tend to have these plea agreements, at least so much of them, right? So okay, so last couple of things, everyone, and then we'll end for today. So yeah, let's just go over these 2 slides. So just give me a couple more minutes. If you have to go, I understand. But let's just go over these last 2 slides so that way we can finish for today. So judicial selection, again, it is independent and accountable because Texas is one of 6 states that uses partisan elections, right? So again, judges are part of the political system because they have to run as political candidates, right? No different than you would see like a legislator, or the governor, right? Now, the issue, of course, with this is that unlike the governor and unlike the legislature, where their job is inherently political, judges, their everyday job is not supposed to be political, right? They're not supposed to be engaging in political decisions. They're just supposed to be deciding on cases, right? And they're supposed to be using the law to decide that, and like I said, we, in a lot of these cases, or in, not a lot, but in some of these cases, we have the juries, right? So the juries also are the ones who ultimately, so if we've got an actual trial, the juries are the ones who make the decision, and the judge is more so like a referee, where they're kind of, that's kind of like how a judge is, like, when you have a jury trial, they're kind of like the referee, where they're deciding what gets admitted, what doesn't, and if you've ever gone to a court, if you've ever gone to a trial, it's very interesting to see. It's almost like an event type of thing, right? Where you kind of, you're not sure how it's going to be. It definitely is there's a lot of drama. That's of course why there's so many of these cop dramas, because the trials can be very full of drama. Now, there are other methods that states use, includes nonpartisan elections, where the judges run, but they don't run as a Republican or a Democrat. We also have appointments that are made by the governor, which again, that's more so like, mirroring the federal level. And we also have the Missouri plan or the merit plan, where the governors can make these appointments, but they have to be approved by these committees, right? And these committees are usually headed by by some of these these legal commissions, like the Texas, the Texas State, bar and all that. So if we had a Missouri plan, a merit system in Texas, the state bar would be the ones to provide names to the governor, and then the governor would make those appointments. And then if the judge wanted to keep their position, then they would have to run for reelection. So it's kind of like a mix of partisan and appointments here. So that's why it's one of the more it's the most popular plan that's used in some of these other states. So notice how Texas is only one of 6, right? So 44 other states are using something other than the partisan election. So that should tell you a little something. Ongoing judicial elections, the campaign and the fundraising. So again, the video that I want you all to see talks about this. It talks about how that one of the major issues here, it says here, right? So Texas judicial candidates finance their election campaigns with private funds. So keep in mind, right, that in American elections, almost all the money that has to be raised in order for someone to run for an office comes from private donations, right? That there's private, that's why I've been getting all these text messages the last couple of days from, to donate for these candidates, right? Because that's the way that the money comes in. It's through private donations. It's not publicly funded. So judges are no different, right? They have to elicit those campaign funds. Now, the video that I want you all to see talks about this, because it talks about how donations from lawyers are the major contributors. Because what was going on in the 60 Minutes investigative segment was that they were trying to investigate who was donating, to these judges. And the truth is that it was mostly lawyers. And one of the lawyers, he talked about how that the reason why that's the way it is because the general public isn't going to be concerned about judges, right? It's a very niche type of system. So really the only people that are going to want to donate to judges are the attorneys, right? People want to donate to the president. They want to donate to governors, the actual more interesting races, right? Whereas a judge, you're probably not going to really have anything to do with the judge unless you get in some sort of legal trouble. So why would people care who gets elected as the judge? So that's the argument that was being made in the video by one of the attorneys there. His name is Joe Jamil. He was actually one of the most famous attorneys in Texas. He passed away a couple of years ago. They actually have it. He went to UT Austin. He was this longtime famous attorney in Houston. And so yeah, so definitely do take a look at that video, because he does. They do ask him these questions and he talks about it. So it definitely does make a lot of logical sense as in terms of the argument that he's making as to why the system is set up the way it is. But with that being said, we can still talk about how there could be some controversy, right? That's so nearly impossible for voters to make informed decisions because, again, how often do people know about judges, especially when, unlike the governor or unlike the president, we do know a little something about where they stand politically, because politics is what their job is, right? They're going to be engaged in politics and making political decisions. But because judges don't make political decisions, then it's really hard to figure out like what they believe in or what they stand in, so it's definitely something that it's definitely difficult for people to look at. And then of course the straight ticket voting, like we've seen in the past, where if you're going to vote for a judge, the only thing you might know is whether they have an R or a D next to their name. So depending on what your political affiliation is, that's going to basically be the deciding factor. And the judicial decisions can be predicted, like we said, by the judge's political party. So If it's a Democrat judge, we can try to infer that they might be more on the judicial activist side, might be a little bit more progressive. If they're a Republican judge, then they tend to be more conservative and more so on the judicial restraint side here. Okay, and the last thing we'll talk about here is the equal justice. So there's substantial evidence that the Texas criminal justice system does not affect all citizens equally. Poor people and people of color are disproportionately affected. Now, there's a lot to say about this, right? Because on average, the people who are more likely to get involved in the criminal justice system usually are people of color, whether it's African Americans, or Hispanics, right? Because on average, they usually tend to be lower on the socioeconomic level. That's not to say that only people of color commit crimes. There's a bunch of white people that commit crimes, because there's also a bunch of poorer white people, especially if you go like into the rural areas in Texas. However, though, because whites definitely tend to, on average, be higher up on the socioeconomic ladder than minorities, it makes a lot of sense that minorities are going to be more disproportionately affected by crime, right? They're going to be more they're going to engage in crime more often because they don't have as much money, right? They're not as high up, because again, there is something to that, right? Like, again, I've studied this in criminal justice, where, if you are having money problems, you can't make ends meet, it's going to frustrate you, and you might be more prone to engage in criminal activity, especially if you need to pay your bills, right? It's going to get you frustrated. You might not be as calm because life isn't going, as smoothly as you need it to be. So yeah, people might act out, and sometimes they might act out of survival, right? If they might have to steal because they don't have enough money, they don't have anything to eat, right? It does unfortunately happen. It's been happening for thousands of years, unfortunately. But with that being said, let's also take a look at some of the other aspects. The expensive legal fees and complex system to navigate. Getting a lawyer is very expensive. I've got some of my friends who are attorneys. They charge pretty good by the hour, right? That's also another reason why I want to do that. I want to get into law school eventually to practice law on the side when I retire. I know some money can come in. But yeah, it's very expensive to hire an attorney. And it's also very complex because, like I said, a lot of these people who are engaging in crimes, they're probably not very educated, right? There is something to that, right? That the higher level of education you have, the less likely you are going to engage in criminal activity. So not all the time, because there's also white collar crime, although that's a different circumstance. If I wanted to talk about criminal justice, we could talk about white collar crime and all that stuff and how and its effects, but we don't have time for that. But yeah, so the idea is that it's expensive, and the people who are most needing that help can't afford it. So prisons and death row are full of poor people because, again, if they had more money to afford, maybe, their own attorney, they'd probably stand a better chance, right? Because Texas lacks a strong system of public defenders. So let me explain. So let me explain the public defender system before we leave for today. The public defender system is where the counties hire these attorneys to go and work for the county to defend people who can't afford their own attorneys, right? So if you remember the Miranda rights, that one of the provisions within the Miranda warning is that you have that right to an attorney if you cannot afford one. One will be provided to you. So the attorney that will be provided to you is the public defender. These are the attorneys that work for the county, and they take on the cases. So if you're a public defender, you are not this person that you're defending. You are not their personal attorney, right? You are there to assist them because they can't get their own personal attorney. So there's a problem there, right? You might not be able to have that close, professional relationship. I mean, you can try to, but if it's your own, if it's your attorney of your own choosing, you're definitely going to feel more comfortable, right? You're going to feel that you can be able to open up more because this is someone that you consider very close to you. But if it's someone that's just assigned to you, you might not necessarily feel that personal connection, right? So again, the people who most need the attorneys can't afford them. Limited funds for public representation mean poor quality of representation, because the poor people who are needing the best attorneys because they're in the most legal trouble, they can't afford the best attorneys because the attorneys are too expensive. Also keep in mind that a lot of these public defenders, they're fresh out of law school. They're trying to get their feet wet because they can make a lot more money in private practice. So you're not even necessarily getting the best attorneys as public defenders because they don't get paid that much. Now, what some states have done is they've instituted a system where the public defender system is they're not county employees. Instead, they're private attorneys, and they have to go through a rotation where they have to, you know, as part of their reaccreditation, their recertification, they have to put in a certain number of public defender hours, which I do like that program, because that ensures that you're still going to get, you know, high quality attorneys, right? Instead of just getting the ones fresh out of law school, right? So, but again, Texas doesn't do that. So Texas, you know, they just hire these public defenders, and so it creates a situation where, you know, are the people who are most needing representation, are they actually getting it? Are they getting the best attorneys? And you know, the truth is that they might not necessarily be, you know, getting that, you know, and things like that. So let me go ahead and stop the share here. So let's go ahead and end for today here, everyone. Let me go ahead and stop recording.